story tonight. And the top story tonight, the immediate former Treasury Cabinet Secretary, Uhuru Yatani, is considering taking legal action against the Controller of Budget, Dr. Margaret Nyakango, of allegations that he exerted undue pressure on her to make irregular withdrawals of public funds amounting to 15 billion shillings a few days to the general election. Yatani has denied the allegations by Nyakango, terming them false, and of course he says they are malicious. And as David Mudoka will be bringing to us, the former CS has accused Nyakango of being selective and economic with the truth when she sat down with a parliamentary committee, adding that up to 7.8 billion shillings from the public coffers was spent by the current administration. That story by David Mudoka in just a few. But first, let's now talk about Article 223. Now, this article of the Constitution has been invoked several times in it's a confidential note, and now it's not so confidential, it's no longer a secret document. Now, this is the law on supplementary appropriation. Let's bring the law up on air, and we begin with Clause 1. Now, this is subject to Clauses 2 to 4, which I'll be telling you shortly. Now, this clause says the national government may spend money that has not been appropriated under the following circumstances. It gives you A, if the amount appropriated for any purpose under the Appropriation Act is insufficient, or a need has arisen for expenditure for a purpose which no amount had been appropriated. That's the first one. Or it could also happen if the money has been withdrawn from the contingency fund. Of course, those are the two circumstances. Well, Yatani says the money released was used, among other things, in fuel subsidy and, of course, building of roads and hospitals. Remember, the president has always said the subsidies only benefited individuals. Well, let's go now to Clause 2. It was brought very early on air, but now it's there. Because this is where the supplementary, go back to Clause 2, that is Clause 3. Please go back to Clause 2. And that is where the law has been anchored. Now, this too says the approval of Parliament for any, let me add, that such spending under this Article 2 shall be sought within 2 months after the first withdrawal of the money, subject to Clause 3, which I'll be telling you about shortly. Now, that Clause 3, before I tell you about it, remember, Yatani has affirmed today that the current Parliament regularized the release of that 15 billion shillings. Now, the Controller of Budget gave to his ministry without parliamentary approval in August of last year. Now, let's go to Clause 3, further explaining what will happen just in case Parliament doesn't approve as mentioned in Clause 2 above. So 3 says, if Parliament is not sitting during that time contemplated in Clause 2 above, or is sitting, but Parliament decides to adjourn before the approval has been sought, well, that approval shall be sought within 2 weeks after the next sitting, or it sits next. While Clause 4 concludes by providing this, when the National Assembly has approved spending under Clause 2 above again, remember these are anchor provisions, anchor clauses, an appropriation bill shall be introduced. Now, that appropriation bill shall be the appropriation of the money already spent into above. Well, that is Clause 2, 3, 4, and 1A. Well, the supplementary clause, I call 5, now we are going to 5. That, we call it a supplementary clause, and it provides a rider in the supplementary appropriation. It says this in 5, if any particular financial year, in any particular financial year, the national government may not spend under this article, that 2 to 3, more than 10% of the sum appropriated by Parliament for the financial year, for that particular financial year, unless in special circumstances, Parliament has approved a higher percentage. Now you get it, Article 223 of the Constitution. And finally, Yatani says nothing he did was unprocedural because even the current government, Yatani says, used the same provision to appropriate funds after they were sworn in back in September. Now, this argument is that it could not be wrong then and right at this particular moment. Now, that's Article 223 of the Constitution. All right, away from that, we will